Years passed, and Ethan's journey only grew more remarkable. Life at Harvard wasn't easy. It was a whirlwind of challenges, sleepless nights, and moments where he questioned whether he truly belonged. But every time doubt crept in, he reminded himself of how far he'd come. He thought about his mom, who worked tirelessly to give him a chance. He remembered the laughter that had once stung so deeply, but ultimately fueled his determination. And most importantly, he held on to the belief that no matter how tough things got, he could rise above it. Ethan threw himself into his studies, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. He joined clubs, participated in debates, and even took on leadership roles within student organizations. Slowly but surely, he began to carve out a place for himself in a world that initially seemed so foreign. His classmates, many of whom came from families with generations of Ivy League legacies, started to see him not as an outsider, but as someone who brought fresh perspectives and relentless drive to the table. But what set Ethan apart wasn't just his academic success. It was his heart. While others focused solely on their own achievements, Ethan made it a point to lift those around him. He mentored younger students, especially ones who felt out of place or doubted their abilities. He organized workshops to help first-generation college students navigate the complexities of university life. And whenever someone needed advice or encouragement, Ethan was there, offering wisdom gained through his own struggles. Back home, news of his accomplishments trickled in regularly. The town followed his progress with pride, sharing updates at local gatherings and celebrating each milestone as if it were their own. Even the girl who had once laughed at his dream kept tabs on his journey, reading articles about his projects and awards. She couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and maybe a little envy at how much he'd achieved. Here was someone who hadn't just overcome obstacles but had used them as stepping stones to greatness. When graduation day finally arrived, Ethan stood among hundreds of students dressed in crimson robes, listening to speeches about ambition, resilience, and changing the world. As he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, the applause from the audience was thunderous. For Ethan, though, the loudest cheer came from inside, a quiet but powerful voice reminding him of the boy who had dared to dream against all odds. Afterward, Ethan decided to return home for a visit before starting his next chapter. The town organized a celebration in his honor, inviting friends, family, teachers, and neighbors to mark the occasion. The event was held in the same auditorium where Dr. Monroe had spoken years earlier, a fitting location for a full-circle moment. When Ethan stepped onto the stage to deliver a speech, the room fell silent, everyone eager to hear what he had to say. Growing up here, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, I never imagined I'd be standing in front of you today talking about graduating from Harvard. There were days when I didn't think I'd make it past high school. Days when people told me my dreams were too big, too unrealistic, too impossible. He paused, scanning the crowd. His eyes landed briefly on the girl sitting near the front. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, unsure of whether he'd call her out or gloss over their shared history. But instead of dwelling on the past, Ethan chose to focus on lessons learned. To anyone here who feels like they don't belong somewhere because of where they come from, or because of what other people have said about them, I want you to know this. Your background doesn't define your future. Your circumstances don't dictate your potential. What matters is how hard you're willing to fight for what you believe in. The room erupted into applause, but Ethan wasn't done yet. And to the person who laughed at my dream, he continued, his gaze locking with hers, thank you. Thank you for pushing me harder than I ever thought possible. Without that push, I might not be standing here today. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the depth of his forgiveness. It wasn't just lip service, it was genuine gratitude for the role she'd unknowingly played in shaping his journey. When the speech ended, she approached him hesitantly, unsure of what to say. I don't know how you can forgive me, she admitted softly, her voice trembling. After everything I did, Ethan smiled warmly, placing a hand on her shoulder. It's easy to hold on to anger, he replied. What's hard is choosing to let go. You taught me something important back then, even if you didn't mean to. So really, we're even. Her guilt melted away under the weight of his kindness. From that day forward, their relationship transformed. They weren't close friends, but they developed a mutual respect that neither had expected. She cheered him on as he pursued his career, attending conferences and events where he spoke about education reform and empowering underprivileged communities. In turn, he supported her efforts to grow and change, encouraging her to chase her own dreams without fear of judgment. As the years rolled by, Ethan went on to achieve incredible things. He became a leading advocate for accessible education, working tirelessly to create opportunities for kids in small towns like the one he grew up in. His story inspired countless others to aim higher, proving that no dream was too big if you had the courage to pursue it. And while the girl who had once laughed at his dream never reached the same level of fame or recognition, she found fulfillment in her own way. Inspired by Ethan's example, she dedicated herself to helping others, volunteering at community centers and mentoring young students. Though their paths diverged, their lives remained intertwined, bound together by a shared understanding of resilience, redemption, and the power of believing in oneself. In the end, both of them learned that success isn't measured by accolades or titles. It's measured by the impact you leave on the world and the people around you. And sometimes the greatest victories come not from achieving your goals alone, but from inspiring others to reach for theirs too. Years turned into decades, and Ethan's story continued to inspire people far beyond the borders of his small town. He became a household name, not because he sought fame, but because his work spoke for itself. Through his advocacy for accessible education, he traveled across the country, visiting schools in underserved communities and speaking to students who reminded him so much of his younger self. He told them about the boy who once dreamed of Harvard despite the odds, about the laughter that had stung but also fueled his determination, and about how even the smallest seed of belief could grow into something extraordinary if nurtured with hard work. But what made Ethan truly special wasn't just his accomplishments, it was the way he carried himself. No matter how busy his schedule got or how many accolades piled up, he remained humble. When strangers approached him after speeches to thank him for inspiring them, he always responded with a warm smile and a simple, "I'm just glad I can help." To him, success wasn't about standing above others. It was about lifting them up alongside him. Back in his hometown, life moved on as it always did. The girl who had laughed at his dream stayed rooted there, building her own quiet legacy. Over time, she transformed from the person who mocked ambition into someone who championed it. She started volunteering at the local high school, mentoring students who felt lost or unsure of their futures. At first, it felt strange. She'd never imagined herself in such a role. But the more she interacted with these kids, the more she realized how much she had to offer. Her conversations with Ethan over the years had planted a new idea in her mind. Maybe she couldn't rewrite her past actions, but she could shape the future for others. One day, while helping a group of seniors prepare college applications, she found herself sharing Ethan's story. "There was this guy," she began, her voice soft but steady, "who came from nothing and dreamed of going to Harvard. People laughed at him, including me, but he didn't let that stop him. Instead, he used it as motivation. And guess what? He made it." The room fell silent as the students listened intently. One of them raised their hand hesitantly. "What happened to him?" they asked. She smiled, a hint of pride in her eyes. "He changed the world. But more importantly, he showed people like us that anything is possible if you're willing to fight for it." It amazed her how easily she could talk about Ethan now, not as someone she'd underestimated, but as someone she deeply admired. Their complicated history no longer weighed on her. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far both of them had come. She often thought about the day she'd apologized to him on his porch, the way he'd forgiven her without hesitation. That moment had taught her something invaluable. Growth isn't about being perfect. It's about learning from your mistakes and using them to become better. Meanwhile, Ethan's journey took him to places he'd only dreamed of as a child. He wrote books, gave TED Talks, and collaborated with policymakers to create programs that opened doors for underprivileged students. Yet no matter how far he traveled or how high he climbed, he never forgot where he came from. Every holiday season he returned home to visit his mom, walking through the same streets where he'd once been teased and ridiculed. Now, though, those same streets were lined with posters celebrating his achievements, and children ran up to him asking for advice or autographs. Months passed after Dr. Monroe's visit, but the memory of that day stayed fresh in Ethan's mind, like it had happened yesterday. He carried her business card everywhere he went, keeping it tucked safely inside the front pocket of his bag. It wasn't just a reminder of what she'd said. It was proof that someone believed in him, someone important, someone who mattered. But having belief from others didn't mean the road ahead was easy. In fact, it felt harder than ever. The college application process was grueling, filled with endless essays, forms, and deadlines. Some nights Ethan would sit at the kitchen table until the early hours of the morning, his head buried in paperwork, while his mom brewed cup after cup of coffee to keep him going. "Are you sure you're okay?" she'd ask, concern etched on her face as she watched him scribble notes or type furiously on the old laptop they shared. "I'm fine," Ethan would reply, forcing a smile. But deep down, he wasn't so sure. Every rejection letter he imagined weighed heavily on his chest. What if all his hard work amounted to nothing? What if Harvard turned him down just like everyone else expected? Still, he refused to give up. He poured every ounce of himself into those applications, the late-night study sessions, the sacrifices he'd made, the dreams he'd chased despite the laughter and ridicule. He wrote about his mom's tireless efforts to provide for them, about the library where he'd spent countless hours escaping into books, and about how Dr. Monroe's words had reignited his faith in himself. By the time he hit submit on his Harvard application, he felt both exhausted and exhilarated, like he'd laid his soul bare for the admissions committee to see. Then came the waiting game. Days stretched into weeks, and each passing moment felt longer than the last. Ethan tried to distract himself by throwing himself into schoolwork and extracurriculars, but it was impossible not to think about it. Every time the mail arrived or an email notification popped up on his phone, his heart raced. Was this it? Had they made their decision? The girl who had laughed at his dream noticed the change in him during this time. She saw how anxious he looked. Whenever he checked his phone, how distracted he seemed in class. Part of her wanted to make another snide comment, to remind him that rejection was inevitable. But something stopped her. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was curiosity. Whatever it was, she found herself watching him more closely, wondering if he really had a shot after all. One crisp spring afternoon, everything changed. Ethan was sitting on the couch at home, flipping through a textbook while his mom folded, laundry nearby. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the TV in the background. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from outside, followed by a sharp knock at the door. Who could that be? His mom wondered aloud, setting down the pile of clothes she'd been folding. She opened the door to find a delivery person holding a thick envelope. Her eyes widened as she read the return address: Harvard University. Ethan froze, his book slipping from his hands and landing with a thud on the floor. For a second, neither of them moved. Then slowly, his mom handed him the envelope. Her hands trembling slightly. "Open it," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. With shaking fingers, Ethan tore open the seal and unfolded the letter inside. His eyes scanned the page quickly, searching for the words that would determine his fate, and then he saw it. "Congratulations. You've been accepted." Time seemed to stop. Ethan stared at the paper, blinking rapidly to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. When the reality finally sank in, tears welled up in his eyes. He turned to his mom, who was already crying, and pulled her into a tight hug. They stood there for what felt like forever, laughing and sobbing together, letting the magnitude of the moment wash over them. Word spread fast in their small town. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate him. Teachers beamed with pride, and even strangers offered warm smiles and kind words. It was surreal. Like overnight, Ethan had gone from being the kid with the impossible dream to the hometown hero everyone cheered for, but not everyone reacted the same way. The girl who had once mocked him heard the news and felt a strange, mix of emotions. On one hand, she couldn't deny the enormity of what Ethan had achieved. Getting into Harvard wasn't easy, not for anyone. Yet on the other hand, she struggled to reconcile this version of Ethan with the image she'd held onto for so long. Wasn't he supposed to fail? Weren't his dreams supposed to stay out of reach? She wrestled with these thoughts for days, unable to shake the feeling that she'd underestimated him. Finally, curiosity got the better of her. At the town's celebratory gathering, a small event organized by the community to honor Ethan's accomplishment, she showed up, though reluctantly. She told herself she was only there to see how much attention he was getting, but deep down, she knew she needed answers. As Ethan stood at the center of the room, surrounded by well-wishers, he spotted her lingering near the back. Their eyes met briefly, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then, surprising even herself, she walked over to him. "Hey," she said awkwardly, shuffling her feet. I wanted to say congratulations." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't expected this, not from her. "Thanks," he replied cautiously, unsure of where this was headed. After a pause, she added almost hesitantly, "I guess I owe you an apology too. I shouldn't have laughed at your dream. Clearly you were serious about it." Her words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Ethan studied her face, searching for sincerity. When he found it, he smiled faintly. "It's okay," he said softly. "Your laughter pushed me harder than I ever imagined." For the first time, the girl truly understood the weight of her actions. She hadn't just doubted Ethan. She'd fueled his determination. And now, standing in front of him as he basked in the glow of his success, she realized something important. Dreams weren't meant to be ridiculed. They were meant to be respected, no matter how big or small they seemed. That night, as Ethan celebrated with his family and friends, he reflected on how far he'd come. From the boy who'd been laughed at for dreaming of Harvard to the man who had actually gotten in, his journey had been anything but easy, but it had taught him something invaluable. Sometimes the people who doubt you the most are the ones who end up cheering the loudest when you prove them wrong. Ethan's acceptance to Harvard didn't just change his life. It changed the way people saw him. Overnight, he went from being the quiet kid with his nose buried in books to someone everyone wanted to talk to. Teachers who had once nodded politely at his ambitious goals now spoke about him with pride, calling him a remarkable young man and predicting great things for his future. Neighbors who barely knew him before started stopping by his house to congratulate him, bringing plates of cookies or offering encouraging words. Even classmates who used to tease him alongside the girl were quick to claim they'd always believed in him. At first, Ethan wasn't sure how to handle all the attention. He wasn't used to being the center of anything, let alone admiration. But as the days went on, he began to embrace it, not because he craved praise, but because he realized his success could inspire others. If he could make it out of their small town and into Harvard, then maybe someone else could too. Maybe his story could show them that no dream was too big if you were willing to work hard enough for it. The girl who had laughed at his dream found herself caught in the middle of this whirlwind. She watched as Ethan navigated his newfound fame with humility and grace, never boasting or rubbing his accomplishment in anyone's face. In fact, he seemed more focused on helping others than celebrating himself. At school, he spent extra time mentoring younger students, sharing tips on studying and applying to colleges. During community events, he encouraged kids from similar backgrounds to aim high, telling them, "If I can do it, so can you." It was impossible not to notice the shift in him and in the way people treated him. The same boy she'd dismissed as naive and unrealistic was now someone everyone looked up to, and while part of her felt proud of what he'd achieved, another part of her couldn't shake the guilt. She replayed their past interactions in her head, cringing at her own words. How could she have been so wrong about him? Why had she assumed his dreams were laughable instead of admirable? One evening, unable to ignore the nagging feeling any longer, she decided to pay him a visit. Ethan was sitting on the porch of his modest home, flipping through a college brochure when she approached. Her steps faltered as she got closer, suddenly, unsure of what to say. What could she possibly offer him now? An apology felt hollow compared to everything he'd accomplished. "Hey," she said awkwardly, hovering near the edge of the porch. Can I sit?" Ethan glanced up, surprised to see her standing there. For a moment he hesitated. Then, nodding toward the empty chair beside him, he replied, "Sure." She sat down gingerly, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably until she finally blurted out, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About what I said to you back then. About how I acted." Ethan turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "And," he prompted gently, sensing she needed space to continue. "And I'm sorry," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't have laughed at your dream. It wasn't fair. I guess I thought. I don't know." A few weeks later, something happened that would shake up the entire school, and Ethan's life along with it. One crisp Monday morning, the principal walked into homeroom carrying a flyer. The room buzzed with curiosity as he pinned it to the bulletin board and cleared his throat. "Listen up, everyone," he announced, his voice cutting through the chatter. "We have some exciting news." Ethan looked up from his notebook, intrigued but not expecting much. School announcements usually revolved around bake sales or sports tryouts, nothing groundbreaking. But this time the principal's tone was different. There was a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Next week," the principal continued, "we will be hosting a very special guest, Dr. Elizabeth Monroe, the president of Harvard University." The room erupted into whispers. Harvard? The Harvard? Even the kids who didn't care about academics perked up at the mention of such a prestigious name. The principal went on to explain that Dr. Monroe was touring high schools across the country, focusing on communities like theirs, places where students often felt overlooked by top-tier universities. She wanted to inspire them, to show them that dreams bigger than their circumstances were possible. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. For a moment he forgot how to breathe. This was unreal. Out of all the schools in the nation, Harvard's president was coming to his town. It felt like fate had stepped in and handed him an opportunity he couldn't ignore. As the principal outlined the details of the visit, a speech, a Q&A session, and even a chance for a few students to meet Dr. Monroe privately, Ethan's mind raced. He knew he had to make the most of this. If there was ever a moment to prove himself, this was it. He could already picture it, sitting face to face with Dr. Monroe, sharing his story, and maybe, just maybe, convincing her that he belonged at Harvard. But as quickly as hope surged within him, doubt crept back in. What if he froze during the Q&A? What if he asked a stupid question and embarrassed himself in front of everyone? Worse yet, what if the girl who had laughed at his dream decided to mock him again, right then and there? The thought made his stomach churn. Still, Ethan refused to let fear hold him back. Over the next few days, he prepared obsessively. He stayed up late researching Harvard's programs, reading interviews with Dr. Monroe and jotting down thoughtful questions. He practiced answering potential follow-ups in the mirror, rehearsing until his voice sounded confident instead of shaky. His best friend noticed his intensity and joked, "You're acting like you're preparing for a job interview, not a school assembly." "It kind of feels like one," Ethan admitted with a nervous laugh. "This could change everything." On the day of the visit, the entire school gathered in the auditorium. Ethan arrived early, clutching a pen and a notebook like they were lifelines. He chose a seat near the back, partly because he didn't want to draw attention to himself, and partly because he wanted to observe before jumping in. Around him, students buzzed with anticipation. Some were scrolling through their phones, others whispering excitedly about what Dr. Monroe might say. Up front, the girl who had laughed at his dream sat confidently, looking completely unbothered. To her, this was probably just another event to attend, not a life-changing moment like it was for Ethan. When Dr. Monroe finally walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. She was elegant yet approachable, exuding a warmth that immediately put people at ease. After a brief introduction from the principal, she began her speech. Her words flowed effortlessly, painting vivid pictures of resilience, ambition, and the power of education to transform lives. She spoke about students who had come from humble beginnings, faced countless obstacles, and still managed to achieve greatness. Ethan hung on to every word, feeling like she was speaking directly to him. At one point, she paused and looked out at the audience. "Dreams are powerful things," she said, her voice steady and full of conviction. "They push us to work harder, to aim higher, and to become better versions of ourselves. Never let anyone tell you your dreams are too big or too small." The room erupted into applause, but Ethan barely noticed. His chest tightened with emotion. Those words, so simple yet so profound, felt like they were written just for him. They reminded him why he had started this journey in the first place, and why he couldn't give up now. After her speech, Dr. Monroe opened the floor for questions. Hands shot up all around the auditorium, including Ethan's. His heart pounded as he waited, hoping against hope that she'd call on him. When she finally pointed in his direction, he nearly jumped out of his seat. Standing up, Ethan took a deep breath. His voice trembled slightly as he began, but he forced himself to keep going. "What advice do you have for someone who dreams of attending Harvard but feels like the odds are stacked against them?" The room grew quiet. Everyone turned to look at him, including the girl who had once laughed at his dream. For a split second, Ethan wondered if he'd made a mistake. Had he sounded too eager? Too desperate? But then Dr. Monroe smiled warmly, and he knew he'd done the right thing. Her answer would stay with him forever, and not just because of what she said. It was the way she said it, with genuine belief and encouragement, that made Ethan realize something important. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to believe in you for the world to start believing too. Dr. Monroe's gaze lingered on Ethan for a moment before she leaned slightly forward, resting her hands on the podium. The room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for her response. Even the girl who had mocked Ethan earlier sat up straighter, her usual smirk replaced by genuine curiosity. "Well," Dr. Monroe began, her voice calm but full of conviction, "let me tell you something about dreams. Dreams are like seeds. They need care, patience, and the right conditions to grow. And yes, sometimes the soil isn't ideal, or the weather seems against us. But if we nurture that seed with everything we've got, it can still take root and flourish." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. He gripped the edge of his seat, hanging on to every word. "Now," she continued, "when someone tells me they dream of attending Harvard, or any big goal, I don't ask them if they think it's possible. I ask them if they're willing to put in the work. Because here's the truth. Getting into a place like Harvard isn't just about being smart. It's about resilience. It's about showing up every single day, even when things feel impossible. It's about believing in yourself more than anyone else does." Her eyes locked onto Ethan's as she added, "And let me make this clear. No one gets to decide what you're capable of except you. Not your circumstances, not other people's opinions, only you." The auditorium erupted into applause, but Ethan barely heard it. His mind was racing. Her words weren't just motivational, they were permission. Permission to keep going, to push past the doubts and the laughter and the obstacles. For the first time, he truly believed that maybe, just maybe, he belonged in a place like Harvard. When the Q&A session ended, Dr. Monroe invited a small group of students to meet her privately. To Ethan's astonishment, he was one of them. As he made his way backstage, his heart was pounding so hard he thought everyone around him could hear it. What would he say? How could he possibly explain his journey in a way that made sense? In the small meeting room, Ethan found himself sitting across from Dr. Monroe, face to face with the person who represented everything he'd ever dreamed of achieving. She smiled warmly, putting him at ease almost instantly. "Tell me about yourself," she said, leaning back in her chair. Ethan took a deep breath and began. He told her about growing up in a small town, about his mom working tirelessly to provide for them, and about how much he loved learning despite the challenges. He shared how he'd always felt drawn to Harvard, not because it was prestigious, but because it symbolized a world beyond what he knew. Most importantly, he talked about the sacrifices he'd made and the determination that kept him going, even when others doubted him. Dr. Monroe listened intently, nodding occasionally and asking thoughtful questions. When Ethan mentioned the teasing he'd endured, her expression softened. "Unfortunately," she said gently, "not everyone understands the value of ambition. But remember this. The people who doubt you today will be the same ones cheering for you tomorrow if you prove them wrong." By the end of their conversation, Ethan felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Before they parted ways, Dr. Monroe handed him her personal business card. "Apply to Harvard," she said firmly. "We need people like you. People who refuse to give up no matter what life throws at them." Ethan stared at the card in disbelief. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was validation. Validation that his dream wasn't ridiculous, that his hard work mattered, and that he stood a real chance. Back in the auditorium, the girl who had laughed at his dream watched the interaction from afar. Something about the scene unsettled her. She saw the way Dr. Monroe spoke to Ethan, the respect and encouragement in her tone. She noticed how focused and confident Ethan looked during their conversation. For the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she'd misjudged him. Later that evening, as Ethan walked home, he couldn't stop smiling. The card was safely tucked into his pocket, but its significance weighed heavily on his mind. He replayed every moment of the day in his head. Reliving the speech? In a quiet little town surrounded by green hills and endless fields of corn, there lived a boy with big dreams. His name was Ethan, and he wasn't like most kids in his neighborhood. While others were happy playing video games or hanging out at the local diner, Ethan spent hours buried in books at the tiny library down the street. He loved learning, not because someone told him to, but because it made him feel alive. Every book he read opened up new worlds, worlds far beyond the small town where he'd grown up. Ethan's mom worked hard to make ends meet. She cleaned houses during the day and waited tables at night just so they could have food on the table and a roof over their heads. Money was tight, but she always encouraged Ethan to dream big. "Don't let where you come from stop you," she'd say, with a tired smile after a long day's work. "You can do anything if you put your mind to it." And Ethan did dream big, bigger than anyone in town thought possible. One evening, as he flipped through an old magazine he found at the library, he came across a picture of Harvard University. The grand buildings, the sprawling campus, the students walking around with purpose, it all seemed magical. That night, Ethan whispered to himself, "I'm going to go there one day." It felt impossible, almost like saying he wanted to visit the moon, but deep down he believed it could happen. At school, Ethan was known for being smart and quiet. Teachers liked him because he paid attention in class and always turned in his homework on time. But not everyone admired him. There was this girl who sat 2 rows ahead of him in homeroom. She came from one of the richest families in town, and she never missed a chance to remind people of it. Her dad owned half the businesses in the area, and her mom threw fancy parties that everyone talked about. One afternoon, during a casual conversation in the hallway, Ethan mustered up the courage to share his dream with her. "I'm planning to apply to Harvard someday," he said softly, expecting maybe a nod or some encouragement. Instead, she burst out laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-blown laugh that echoed down the hall. "Harvard?" she managed to say between giggles. "You? Seriously? Do you even know how much it costs or how hard it is to get in?" Her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. For a moment, he stood frozen, unsure of what to say. Then, trying to keep his voice steady, he replied, "Yeah, I know it's tough, but I think I can do it." "Oh, please," she shot back, rolling her eyes dramatically. "People like us don't belong in places like that. Stick to reality, okay?" The comment spread quickly among their classmates. By lunchtime, everyone knew about Ethan's crazy dream, and soon enough, it became a running joke. Some kids joined in, teasing him whenever they saw him studying too much or carrying around thick textbooks. Others just shook their heads. thinking he was wasting his time chasing something so out of reach. For days, Ethan couldn't shake off the sting of her laughter. It replayed in his mind over and over again, especially late at night when he should have been sleeping. Was she right? Was Harvard really just a silly fantasy? Maybe he was aiming too high. But then, lying awake in bed, he remembered something his mom once said. If you spend your life worrying about what other people think, you'll never get anywhere. That thought gave him strength. Sure, she laughed. Sure, some people doubted him. But why should that matter? If anything, her mockery only made him more determined. He decided right then and there that he wouldn't let her or anyone else define what he was capable of achieving. Little did he know, though, that this moment would set the stage for a story far bigger than either of them could have imagined. Ethan's decision to push forward, despite the laughter and teasing, didn't come easy. It wasn't just about ignoring a few mean comments, it was about proving something to himself. Every time he sat down to study, he could almost hear her voice in the back of his mind. Harvard? You? Those words haunted him, but instead of letting them break him, he used them as fuel. He started waking up an hour earlier every morning to review his notes before school. During lunch breaks, while other kids played basketball or gossiped in the cafeteria, Ethan stayed in the library, flipping through textbooks and scribbling practice problems. His best friend noticed the change. You're working twice as hard these days, his friend said one afternoon, leaning against the library table where Ethan was buried under piles of papers. What's gotten into you? Ethan looked up, pushing his glasses further up the bridge of his nose. I'm tired of people thinking I can't do it, he replied simply. They laugh because they don't understand, but I know what I'm capable of. His friend nodded, impressed by Ethan's determination. Well, if anyone can make it happen, it's you. Just don't burn yourself out, all right? Ethan smiled faintly but didn't say much. He appreciated the support, but deep down he knew this journey was his alone. No one else could fight his battles for him. And honestly, he didn't want them to. This was personal now. Meanwhile, the girl who had laughed at his dream continued to mock him whenever she saw him. She'd roll her eyes dramatically in the hallway or whisper jokes to her friends when Ethan walked past. At first, Ethan tried to ignore it, keeping his head down and focusing on his work. But over time, the constant ridicule started to wear on him. It wasn't just her. It was the way others joined in too. Some kids mimicked her tone, calling out sarcastic remarks like, "Hey Harvard, when are you leaving for Boston?" Others pretended to take pictures of him with their phones, saying, "We need proof that someone from here actually applied." It hurt more than Ethan cared to admit. There were moments when he wanted to scream back, to defend himself and tell them all how wrong they were. But he bit his tongue every time. Arguing wouldn't change anything. It would only give them more ammunition to use against him. So, he kept quiet and let his actions speak for themselves. One day, after another round of taunts in the cafeteria, Ethan went home feeling defeated. He threw his backpack onto the floor and slumped into a chair at the kitchen table. His mom was cooking dinner, humming softly to herself as she stirred a pot of soup. When she turned around and saw the look on his face, she stopped mid-stir. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, setting the spoon aside and pulling up a chair next to him. Ethan hesitated, unsure if he should burden her with his troubles. She already worked so hard to provide for them. Did he really need to add to her worries? But then he sighed and spilled everything. About the girl laughing at his dream, about the teasing at school, about how sometimes he wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe Harvard was too far out of reach. His mom listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. When he finished, she reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let me tell you something," she said gently. "When I was your age, people told me I'd never amount to much either. They said I should just accept my place and stop dreaming about better days, but here's the thing, you don't have to listen to them. What matters is what you believe." She paused, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "If Harvard is what you want, then go after it. Work harder than anyone else, stay focused, and don't let anyone make you doubt yourself. Because trust me, The people who laugh now will be the same ones clapping for you later. Her words struck a chord deep inside Ethan. For the first time in weeks, he felt a spark of hope reignite within him. His mom was right. He didn't have to prove anything to those who doubted him. All he had to do was focus on his goal and keep moving forward. The next morning, Ethan woke up with renewed energy. He decided to channel all the negativity into something positive. Instead of letting the teasing bring him down, he began using it as motivation. Each snide comment became a reminder of why he needed to succeed. Each eye roll fueled his determination to show them that dreams weren't just for the privileged few. But even as Ethan doubled down on his efforts, the girl who had laughed at him remained oblivious to the impact of her words. To her, Ethan was still just a kid from the wrong side of town chasing an impossible fantasy. She couldn't see the late nights he spent studying, the sacrifices he made, or the fire burning inside him. All she saw was someone trying and failing in her mind to rise above his circumstances. Little did she know, though, that fate had a way of turning tables. Neither Ethan nor the girl realized that their lives were about to intersect again, in a way neither of them could have predicted. A single event was looming on the horizon, an event that would not only challenge their assumptions but also redefine the boundaries of possibility. And when it happened, nothing would ever be the same again.